All right, everyone, welcome back. We're excited to kick off Wednesday, April 20th, as we prepare for Chris Krimitsos. Chris and I actually work at Podfest together, and today he's going to be talking about podcasting and on-demand video. And just so you know a little bit about Chris, Chris says that if you spent any time, or people say about Chris that if you spent any time with him, you'll hear descriptions like changemaker, motivator, catalyst for change, inspiration. Whether it's a major corporation, CEO, or solopreneur, Chris is passionate about being a difference maker. And unlike the featured guest who comes in and delivers a keynote and leaves, slipping out the back door like a national celebrity, Chris Krimitsos is the passionate professional who hangs around talking to anyone who wants his time to listen, evaluate, and affect change. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Chris Krimitsos on podcasting and on-demand video.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Really excited to be part of this and excited to talk to everyone. I'm going to share my screen here. And I have one too many PowerPoints, as Andrew knows. Here we are. All right, let's do this. So we're going to talk about podcasting as well as on-demand video. And let's go through this. First off, let's start with the definition of podcasting. It's on-demand searchable audio found through the internet via computer or mobile device. So that's really important because most people think of a podcast as a show, but technically it's on-demand searchable audio found through the internet via a computer or mobile device. And a lot of times people don't realize how important this content is. Tinder a while back released that they were actually going to get into the content game with original video. And the question I always ask people is, why is a dating app like Tinder creating original content? Why is Apple, the company that actually supplies the plumbing for podcasting, they have the largest player in the world, why are they creating original content? The answer is the value is in the content because the distribution is actually flat for the most part, and more distribution channels are coming online. So it's distributing your content. The other advice I have for people that ask me about, hey, I want to start a show, I want to have an audience, start within a defined niche. So this is Gary Vaynerchuk. He's known as I would say the Tony Robbins of today. So he's the entrepreneur most people know. But Gary, believe it or not, started in the world of wine. So Gary had a wine podcast, not even podcast, show on YouTube, and he parlayed that into his entrepreneur endeavor. I brought him in when he first wrote his first book, Crush It. By the way, Gary doesn't even like writing. They actually hire writers for him, and they basically just take his speeches and then write the books. That's how most of his books are written. He has a staff, and they basically repurpose his content in written form. So he's really created a brand around him. But the thing to remember is Gary started with wine. The other really amazing individual that most people don't remember how she started was Rachel Ray. Rachel Ray is an everyday brand, but Rachel Ray started in a very defined niche. She started with 30-minute meals with Rachel Ray. So basically, her niche was, at the time, moms wanted to cook something healthy for their children, and Rachel Ray was the answer. Instead of them doing a box of mac and cheese, she created the show, or the Food Network created the show for her, and it was 30 minutes or less, cooking really quick but healthy dishes for your children. So that's a very specific niche that she tapped into. Then she became the everyday, brand, like a younger version of a Martha Stewart. Ellen DeGeneres, a lot of individuals take for granted. They know her as a sitcom star, and then if you're old enough like myself, you know her as a stand-up. So she started as a stand-up, transitioned to sitcom, and now she's an everyday brand. So the biggest lesson, and the reason why I'm drumming this home, is I highly recommend you start within a defined niche so you grab your audience. It's super important. The other thing I get asked is, what do I use to podcast? So I recommend this microphone. It's called Audio-Technica AT2005. It's USB enabled. So if you type this in Amazon, you can buy this. It's under $100. It's a mic I'm using right now. All you have to do is plug this microphone in to your USB. That's the cool thing about it. And then you have to just turn it on. Once you turn it on, half the battle is done. I like to use Zoom to record, but also there's Squadcast. And then what you do is you upload it into iTunes, and then that's how a podcast gets delivered. If for whatever reason you need how-to help, this is really important to remember. You need to go on YouTube and type in how-to XYZ. All your answers are already at your fingertips, so there's no reason why you should be stuck on something. because you don't know how to do it. The information's already out there on the internet. The other opportunities in audio is understanding format opportunities. So my wife owns the Women's Meditation Network, and she found a format opportunity in guided meditations. And what I mean by that is there was two things that people weren't doing well. One is they weren't stating the intention of the guided meditation before they started the guided meditation. So that was a huge opportunity. Two is individuals didn't title their titles of their episodes to the modern everyday woman. Instead, they were titling like, tap into your orange chakra. And that would be what we would call two inside baseball. That's people that really study meditation. So her titles would be like shatter imposter syndrome, tap into your magic, step into your potential, when you're feeling blocked, inhale the good, exhale the bad. So these are titles that spoke to everyday women. And as you could see, her show started growing almost immediately from the very moment she started. A lot of individuals ask me, Chris, that's really great, but I don't know where to start. I don't know how to search for this stuff. How do I know? Well, when you go in iTunes, in the podcast store, the podcast player in iTunes, it's its own little orange, it's its own little purple icon. You could hit the button called related. And when you hit related, it shows you related shows. Or, your listeners like these other shows, and it has like a recommended algorithm. In this case, you see Dr. Bill Auxier started the Rural Health Leadership Show. And you'll see that rural is a keyword that pops out when you do that kind of search. So you can find your keywords in other shows by looking at what's related in what your listeners are listening to. Again, this is a real estate show. When you hit related, real estate shows pop up. This is one of my favorite ones as far as Q&A. This is a show, literally someone is answering questions that people are asking, and then they're 7 to 5 minutes long. Dr. Ryan Gray is a doctor that helps people in their pre-med years. And here, all he has is the answers to people's questions. So imagine in your industry, if you're an artist, if you're a sculptor, or if you're some kind of creative where people ask you questions all the time. Imagine if you said, ask your name, and then you literally label it like sculptor Q&A, or whatever the art form that you're part of, or the creative form. People will find these because if you remember my definition in the beginning, on-demand audio is searchable in nature. So people could search these questions and they could find these answers all throughout the world because it's listed on a podcast. I'm a big fan of B2B podcasts. So this is the government contracting officer. Kevin Jans is a B2B specialist. He does RFPs for really large government contract institutions. But this conference expert, basically what we've seen is if you're a podcaster and you go out to a conference, your niche conference with your brand, you could literally land some really large sponsorships when you go out to those places. This is a really great case study. Lee Silverstein created the colon cancer podcast, and he was sponsored by the Colon Cancer Alliance. He later expanded outside of that to the We Have Cancer. So when he goes out to the Colon Cancer Alliance in Phoenix, they give him free press passes. They have him interview everybody. Now his brand has grown to include anyone that's impacted by cancer. So it's been a really amazing journey to watch him grow. The other part people don't realize is you don't even have to have a podcast to benefit from podcasts. You could go on a media tour without leaving your home. So there's Interview Valet and Interview Connections. These are speaker booking agencies where you could get booked to be on podcasts and be interviewed about your art form, your creativity, and then lead people back to your website at the end when they ask you, hey, what do you have, that you'd like to share with our audience? And that's when you do that. This is a good friend of mine, Craig Cody. He's a CPA. His target is doctor offices. So when he talks to doctors, he basically will be on their podcast and say, hey, if you go to my website, we'll send you a book on how to best manage your practice and the ins and outs of how to do that. And we'll ship it free of charge. And it says it right here, request a free copy of the 12 biggest tax mistakes that cost business owners thousands. So he ships it to you for free. It's a real book. And that's how he lands really large accounts, by doing this value add gift after people have heard him on a podcast. So pretty amazing. He's done hundreds of podcasts, but now he has his own podcast that specializes towards dentists. Now let's talk about video branding and channels on video. This is my buddy, Gabe Aloisi. He started the Let's Play Through YouTube show. I highly recommend, if you get a chance, go on YouTube and subscribe to it. Great show. Remember when we first started it, we had a couple hundred views. Since then, Let's Play Through, Gabe owns a creative agency, marketing agency. Let's Play Through has literally taken off. He's about to crest over. If you see here, he had 307 subscribers shortly out of the gate. But as of today, Let's Play Through is about to hit 6,000 subscribers. He's looking forward to being a full-time influencer, talking about golf and reviewing golf tools. It's pretty amazing to have watched this transition over a year and a half. And it's pretty cool to watch a friend of yours go from owning an agency, but now becoming a full-time influencer with an agency on the side. It's pretty amazing. So thumbnail images with YouTube and on-demand videos is really important. So what you're looking at is a YouTube screen of someone's channel. Dabble Labs is a friend of mine who basically does Alexa skills. And what he did was create a channel. And as he was teaching his people in different parts of the world how to use Alexa skills, he said, I'll put these tutorials up on YouTube so they could just access it there. And if other people find it, that's great. Turned out one of the largest CEOs in the world, CTOs, found it and started giving him business. And it literally quadrupled his size of his business, all from someone watching his YouTube channel saying, you know what, we should hire this guy to do all our Alexa skills for our corporate clients. And he's now booked work for some of the largest governments and municipalities around the world. A lot of people ask me, Chris, where can I get help? Make sure to join the Podfest Multimedia Expo community. If you type in Podfest, you'll find our, I think it's facebook.com/groups/Podfest. And Andrew, if you have that link, put in the chat for everybody watching this. It'd be great if you join the group. The last thing I would add is doing keyword search on Google is very important. So I use a tool called Keywords Everywhere, and you can literally do SEO search on your Chrome extensions. Very easy to use. The other thing that a lot of people like to use is Answer the Public. So you could put, if you're doing a show, you could put your topic of what you're doing. Like here, let's say I'm a real estate show, I put how to sell my business. I'm sorry, if I'm a business broker, I put how to sell my business. All of these things are things people ask about how to sell their businesses. Most of these could be a show topic that you do for your podcast. So it's pretty robust, the things that you can do with the right tools. I produced this book called Start Ugly, and that's my philosophy and how I do things. I start ugly and I perfectly execute along the way. I find that fundamental to starting anything is it's always an ugly start. And as you improve, you get better and better at it. Oh, so for everybody that's here, I actually created a free coupon code to attend, thanks to Holly and Jerry. If you go to podfestglobal.online, use the code Masterclass, you get a free pass to our next virtual event, which is called Podfest Masterclass. Just go to that website, use the code Masterclass, and you could attend free of charge. And the promo code's right up there. Thanks to Holly and Jerry for putting this together. So at this point, Andrew, I'll open it up for questions.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know that since we worked together in Podfest, one of the things I appreciate is when you mentioned how when you were first getting started in podcasting, you kept stopping and starting. And I feel like a lot of people are hard on themselves for that. Can you talk about that, of your own journey of getting started in podcasting?
Yeah, a lot of people will start and stop, and that's okay. Let me stop sharing here. That's okay. If you stop and start, the main thing is to know that you're on a creative process and a creative journey. And on that journey, you're going to find your answers. So I always tell people, feel free to start ugly, feel free to explore, feel free to find your voice. And the most important part is allow yourself to discover. In that process, we have found that some of the most well-known podcasters we know of today had one or two false starts that didn't work for them. And over time, they found, their calling, or they found their podcast that they literally, everybody knows them as their calling card, but it didn't start out that way. I remember one story, actually. Neil Gilarte and I were at a seminar training in another part of the country, and he was sitting next to this one guy, and he's like, yeah, I hate my podcast. I think I'm going to stop it. I'll figure out what I'm going to do. I'm going to retool. And a month later, he retooled with this podcast called the $100 NBA, and it became like top 10 in all of iTunes. And we couldn't believe, like, we were sitting next to the guy a month later, he created something that literally 4 or 5 months later became #1 in iTunes. So you just never know when inspiration hits. So allow yourself to experiment and not be held to any one, success metric. As long as you're happy and you're actively creating and you're perfectly executing as you go, I think that's really important.
No, thank you for sharing that. That is good to know that things can change in as little as a month. So that's definitely pretty cool. And Holly also wanted to know, how do you go about getting guests on, she wants to know, yeah, how do you become a guest on podcasts is the question.
So one of the best tools, and Andrew, if you have the link, is podmatch.com. That's a free tool. Our friend Alex Sanfilippo created it. You could literally go register on podmatch.com, and basically it's a database of really great guests, and podcasts will go through that database looking for guests. So I would go to podmatch.com. It's probably the best tool out there right now going.
All right, perfect. And then, yeah, can you tell us more of the stories? It's definitely pretty cool that you got to host Gary Vee back when he was before Gary Vee, essentially. I'm sure the audience would love to hear more about that experience and what that was like for him.
So if you don't know who Gary Vaynerchuk is, he's literally the modern day Seth Godin, but Tony Robbins would be the analogy people would get. When I found out about him, I was watching his wine blog, and you could tell that he was going to be the next big thing because he was taking on sacred cows. I remember him ripping on Howard Stern even back then, saying, "Oh, this guy's old and over the hill." And he had a lot of bravado. But when he wrote the book Crush It, it was a definitive moment in our time where people didn't understand that social media was about to take over, but he did. So I was teaching social media in Tampa. And I remember saying, I'll bring this guy in and he's going to shake things up. Now, Gary was the first speaker to actively curse on stage constantly. He was a watershed moment in that before him, people had certain rules that they wouldn't cross over. He shattered every single one of them on stage. So he was definitely a groundbreaking individual. So he basically came in. I remember there was no speaking fee for him because he wasn't that famous yet. He was well known in smaller circles. We had 150 people. I bought a book for everybody. So that was kind of the payment. I bought a bunch of his books. He came down. He was barnstorming the country with his message at the time. And then we sold his books. And what I remember really well was Gary understood that social media was going to be international movement that people didn't understand yet. And he was going to get at the front of the line of that movement and become the voice of that generation. I, at the time, was doing the same thing he was doing, but locally, not understanding how big the movement was. And it taught me something about timing and understanding your time and place. Gary understood the time and place was ready for someone to step up into the void, telling people you better get on the social media train. Because a lot of people don't realize companies back then didn't get it. Like, why do I need this? Why do I need to invest in this? There's no return on this. This is kind of stupid. I don't get it. I mean, we would hear that for years. I mean, like, I don't think I needed a Facebook account. Now it's funny, but at the time it wasn't funny. And you'd have to convince people why they needed to use these tools. So I promised myself, next time I see something that I think would be ubiquitous, that could really help people, I want to grow that and help people. And that's when I found podcasting in 2013. And for whatever reason, podcasting lagged behind YouTube and on-demand video. And I think it's because people don't replace their cars as often as they do their TV. We, on average, replace our cars 8 years. And what does that have to do with podcasting? Well, at the time, the primary way people listened to on-demand audio was in the car through their radio. So you'd have to have a brand new, uh, mobile device and a newer car to link up the Bluetooth into the radio. So there was like this 8-year lag behind on-demand video for audio, which I found very fascinating. So at the time, I understood the timing was right for someone to lead the charge in that space. So what I did is I created the Florida Podcasters Association, and then we created Florida Podfest. And I realized I was thinking too small. And then we took Florida off the name, just called it Podfest. And then Podfest literally kept doubling in size year over year over year. And that literally, the rest is basically history. So we now are the largest independent conference in the world. But I would tell you, I thank Gary for kind of just doing what he did, showed me an example of timing. And I don't think people understand timing is probably the most important, besides like having the chutzpah, wanting to work. Timing is probably the most important thing in business, and not being lazy. So a lot of people get lazy. They get fat and lazy. They get fed. They stop hustling, and that's something that I think the Start Ugly ethos is about. Is always be willing to start ugly, grow, and push through your boundaries. And I notice a lot of people tend to get very lazy very quickly. So always be willing to start ugly.
Well, that's a lot of amazing advice, and thank you for sharing that. The importance of timing. I know that there's definitely a great TED talk about that, about this guy talking about how all these great ideas happened before they became a thing, and it's all because of timing. So it's definitely interesting to hear about. And we talk about being lazy. What is it that you do yourself to make sure that you're self-disciplined and staying on track and always moving forward no matter what?
I can't say I'm the most disciplined person, but I can't say I put a lot on my agenda, sometimes too much to handle. So right now, Andrew, we're putting on the first ever Florida Blockchain Summit. So that coupled with masterclass has really stretched my time. But that's how I push the boundaries. It's something new, it's something fresh, it's something different. So that's what we're working on. And that's kind of, that's me pushing past the boundaries. And with COVID, quite honestly, the whole year has been a start ugly. Had to transition from an in-person model to a complete 100% virtual model. I still haven't done an in-person event yet since the last in-person event that I did in March 6th through the 8th, 2019. So, or no, 2020, sorry. We were one of the few events that got off last year. Um, so it's a constant start ugly of learning stuff.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's see, we have another question from the audience. They want to know, do you have any funny stories or quote unquote start ugly stories of people starting a podcast and anything crazy or interesting happening to them when they're first starting their podcast?
I have a start ugly story. Well, I remember Gabe Aloisi when he started Private Club Radio. I remember he did vocal warm-ups. So he'd do these warm-ups like me, la 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 la, and he'd do all these weird sounds, and you'd be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyways, he was doing his vocal warm-ups and didn't realize that he recorded them and he put it in his intro of his show. So when you listen to his show, it was kind of funny because Private Club Radio goes out to the most exclusive clubs in the world, like all the high end, like, Ritz-Carlton type clubs. And it's like a British voice was his intro. And here is the Private Club Radio. And in the background, you hear me, ma, yeah, yeah, yeah. And he put it out live. And it made us laugh because it's like, of all the shows to have the Private Club Radio show, and you could hear him doing his vocal warm-ups, and we couldn't stop laughing. He fixed it obviously eventually, but it went out to the public in that form. It was kind of funny.
Hopefully that is hilarious. Yeah, just imagine a guy sitting in a nice golf resort, suit and tie, sipping on some drink, and then he just started
that's what you hear when you're playing. You hear someone just doing their mouth noises. It's kind of funny.
Well, that is awesome. And we also had another question from the audience. They want to know well, yeah, we'd love to hear more about how you balance a business relationship and personal relationship with you and your wife, and for all those brand builders out there and putting together podcasts and co-hosting with their wife. How do you go about doing that?
So in our household, we're a dual business household. So I do events. So Podfest, really cutting edge events is the banner for what I work under. And that's whatever events that I put on go under that banner. And then I do some consulting with CK Productions. Not as much as I used to, because at this point, the events take most of my time. And quite honestly, I don't really enjoy the consulting, even though I'm really good at it. Katie, on the other hand, does Women's Meditation Network, which means she has 4 shows on her network. So she creates shows for meditation for women, sleep meditation for women, morning meditation for women, and then she now has sleep sounds for women. So Katie is very busy creating. So what I do is in my spare time, I work as her marketing manager. So I love working deals and marketing angles for her to reach bigger audiences. And then the cool part is where I'm deficient, which is paperwork is really the one area I'm really deficient. She'll come in and help me with paperwork, and we support one another. So we look at our dual entrepreneur lifestyle as supporting each other where we're weakest, and then staying out of each other's lanes where we're strongest. And we found that combination really helps us. And we've worked together hand in hand in a business in the past, and it just didn't work for us. It was like oil and water. Just our personality types will clash. I'm fly by the seat of the pants entrepreneur, and she's a operational excellence execution type person. So sometimes those don't always mesh well. So right now we have a really good balance that works for both of us. Makes me happy to help her with the with her marketing, and it makes her really happy to help me with like billing and paperwork stuff that I really hate to do.
Well, and you mentioned that you're really good at consulting, and you're on the stage. We want to give you a chance to brag. What are some of your favorite success stories of people or companies you've helped and you were consulting them?
There's quite a few. One was the crime scene cleaning. They just got picked up for HGTV. Um, Crime Scene Cleaning is a YouTube channel, and literally they do crime scene cleaning. Found it very interesting. 90% female audience. Men want nothing to do with crime scenes when we were doing the research. But at the time, we were consulting with this really great entrepreneur, Laura Spalding, and her team, and they didn't have a mascot. And I said, "We need to have a mascot." And she said to me, "How are we going to find a mascot?" I go, "That's very easy. We're going to read your comments, and your audience is going to let us know what you have." Turned out that they loved her show. They love talking about how they love maggots because they do all their cleaning for them, which is kind of gross. But her show and topic is very morbid. So we created a plushie called uh, Maggie the Maggot, and her fan base just ate it up. So I helped brainstorm the productizing of this very morbid topic, and the fan base loved it. She just announced the other day that she got picked up for HGTV show.
Wow, Maggie the Maggot. It's so it's literally like a little plush pillow you can go to sleep with at night and hug, just hugging a
Pretty
pillow.
much, yeah. Her fan base loves it. And then, I mean, there've been many. I do a lot of consulting on. So, most recently, the only one in the room, Laura Cathcart Robbins and Scott, they do a great show about being the only one in that room. So it starts. The original origin of it was she was at a conference and she was only African American and like 400 women in the room. And she just talks about what it feels like to be the only one in the room. And what she did really well is she spun the concept in not just making it a black and white issue. She made it like, have you ever felt like you were the only one in the room? So she had like a white guy that was the only one not included in the prison gangs in prison. So like, like you could spin it on different ends. Were you the only one, in another country where you couldn't communicate with the language? So it's really amazing what she's done with it. But they came to me for support, and I was able to iron out their marketing strategy. They've since tripled in the last 6 months. They've tripled their downloads. And well, the one thing I really liked is she was a writer, and they were creating these extra bonus episodes that were really not hard to produce, but it took time. Okay. And when I deal with clients, time is the one asset they don't get back. So I noticed she was a writer, and I said, why don't you just do like from your nightstand reading an article that you've read before or something you really like that you want to share with your audience? It's become one of her most popular segments, where she literally reads a blog article or something she's seen and highlights these authors from all over the world. So that was really interesting because that was a way we could create content without her having to do any extra work. So when she finds an article she likes, she loves to read, she's a writer, she then highlights it on her show. And that has become a tour stop for authors now. But that client, we're still working. It's probably my last of my consulting work. She's had tremendous success, and it's been a pleasure to work with her.
Oh, that's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing. And I noticed we have Dakota here. Dakota, welcome. Feel free to ask Chris any questions around podcasting, around branding, around community building, around how to monetize your brand. And no worries if not. Just want to give you the option to do that. Feel free to type it in the chat or ask it in the Q&A or raise your hand. I can unmute you. So here's a chance to ask Chris because he has to get going here pretty soon. Chris, is any final things that you wish you had more time to talk about or you wanted to mention to the audience today?
I wish more people really understood the power of this on-demand revolution, because with artificial intelligence, a lot of our activities are getting automated overnight. And I don't think we realize how fast it's happening. After COVID broke, I remember going in August, I went to the airport last year to go fly out. And I remember everything had gotten automated, like 3-4 people that I have to walk through was no longer there. So COVID has pushed us 5 years ahead of schedule for how people are using tech tools. And the reason why I'm very passionate about people having a platform. So for me, a lot of people ask me, Chris, what's your platform? Now I have the kid-friendly joke of the day, but I have a producer that produces it for me. But my platform is Podfest, my events, right? That's where people get to know me. That's where I get to share messages and I get to do a lot of speaking. So for a lot of people, events aren't really, because events are like very punishing and grueling, Andrew, as you know, and they're not easy to produce. And getting people to an event is extremely difficult. So what I would recommend for people is find an audience via podcast or YouTube or a TikTok. And if you can find that audience and deliver something of quality, you have something as a backup as everything gets artificially intelligized and replaced. And like CPAs, they're going to be replaced, the majority of them. So are lawyers. Like any simple legal documents already being replaced on the internet. Andrew's generation are using tools all the time. They don't really even see a need for finding a professional. They go on the internet. Andrew, I remember watching a young kid, probably your age, on YouTube, bitching about that it took him 3 hours to sign paperwork to buy a car. He bought his first BMW. And I realized my generation, that was normal. You sit through a thing for 3 hours. Your generation, your generation doesn't want to stand for it. To your generation, it's a waste of time. Let's just do a sign now request or DocuSign and automate those signatures that take 3 hours in 5 minutes. And I had a friend of mine argue, well, that's how you buy a car. I go, not for the next generation, dude. That's because you've been classically trained to sit there for hours. So have I. Next generation will not deal with that. So everything needs to be automated quickly, and time is of the essence. So if you understand that, what that means is as your business, and by the way, artificial intelligence is making really good music. So it's also creating art, which is kind of scary. So the one thing that you have is your voice and your relationship to your audience. And if you could start building that however you can on whatever platform, I would say the time to get started is now, because tomorrow is not guaranteed. Look at COVID. A lot of the people that I cater to did extremely well in COVID. A lot of my relatives up in New York that deal with the restaurant industry, decimated. And these people spent, literally, you're talking about 40, 50-year businesses that were passed down from one generation to the next. Yes. Did they survive? Yes. But did they go through most of their cash hoard that they had saved up over the years? Absolutely. Meanwhile, the online influencers only did better because everybody flocked online. So I would have it as a parallel to anything that you're doing. I would create some kind of online platform and do the least amount of possible if you're overwhelmed, and get started at whatever frequency you're comfortable with.
I love that. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on today and presenting to our audience. What's the best way to get a hold of you if people wanted to follow up?
ChrisKrimitsos.com. And if you want to buy the book, it's on Amazon, Start Ugly. Great book. Got a lot of great reviews. If you like it, leave me a great review. If you don't, email me at Chris@Podfest Expo and we could talk about it offline.
Perfect. I'll make sure to put your website in the chat, and thank you again for coming by.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right.